Are you a beginner sewer and want to create your own capsule wardrobe collection for this spring and summer? Then join me on my sew-alongs for my spring-summer beginner capsule wardrobe collection. Today's vlog is going to be all about the dress that we're going to do and the prep that you need to do before you start sewing. So let's get cracking. Hi there, I'm Christine the Gemini Stitcher and welcome to my sewing space. As I've already said, we're starting our capsule wardrobe collection today and I am so excited to be doing this with you. Today's vlog is going to be all about the preparation, so we're going to be covering sizing, cutting out and the tools and equipment that you need before you get started, so that next week's vlog we can hit the ground running and get on with our sewing. So the pattern we're going to be doing is the Seasons of East Summer in New York dress. There's an image of the Seasons of East dress. It's the one that you lovely viewers all voted for and it's one of my favourite dresses too. So what equipment are we going to need to make the Seasons of East dress? I'm going to run through all the equipment that you're going to need for this sewing project, and there's quite a bit of it, but I've covered it from a beginner's point of view, so please don't say at the screen, of course you need that, Christine, because yes, I know some of you already know. So the first thing that you're going to need is pretty darn obvious, and it's your sewing machine. Now this dress will sew on any sewing machine. It's only going to use the zigzag stitch and the straight stitch, so don't worry that your machine isn't good enough. If you're a beginner and you've got a basic machine, you're going to be able to sew this dress on it. The other thing that I use and will be using is my overlocker. You don't need an overlock, you can use the zigzag stitch to finish the seams on your standard sewing machine, but an overlocker does give a better finish and it's a quicker sew. You're going to need dressmaking scissors, obviously, not your paper scissors that you use or your meat scissors from your kitchen drawer. If you haven't got a pair of dressmaking scissors, treat yourself to some. These are my favourites and they're the Prim Micro Serration scissors that I use for my sewing projects. You're going to need some decent pins. There are a lot of them out there. Get dressmaking pins, and I have mine on a little magnet to keep them all nice and tidy. You'll need a marking pen. Now I use the water soluble kind that washes off, but you can get the heat eraser ones where when you put your iron over them they disappear. They don't seem to work for me because when I press as I'm going I end up pressing the lines out, so I use the water soluble ones. Top tip, before you start marking your fabric, get a little scrap, mark it, stick it under the tap and see if the lines disappear first. You're going to need sewing needles or a sewing needle for your machine. Now you can use, these are the Schmidt standard 80 needles, which may be absolutely fine for you to use. But if you're sewing in viscose or cotton lawn fabric or a floaty fabric, I recommend Microtex needles. They have a sharper needle point and they stop your fabric from snagging and marks showing on it. You'll also want some interfacing. Now I use woven interfacing. This is lightweight woven. You're only going to need a small amount for this particular garment, but I would invest in some just for your sewing stash. You can get this online. I think I got this from eBay. It can be quite expensive, so I would go on eBay, search for woven interface, lightweight woven interfacing. Check when you're ordering it that it does say it's woven, because the non-woven ones sneak in there and I don't like non-woven. It's pretty nasty stuff. So you're going to spend a long time sewing your garments, so put on the inside as good as what's on the outside is my view. You'll need a ruler. A standard 12-inch ruler is fine. We're not using it for measuring with, we're going to use it for drawing straight lines. A tape measure for the dreaded measurements that we're all going to have to take. A hand sewing needle. Now, I know you're thinking, well, we're using the sewing machine, but we use the hand sewing needle in this project for doing tailor's tacks and for some hand stitching as well. This is a sleeve roll, and I'm going to be using this when I'm pressing the seams on the shoulders of the seams. Then I'm not pressing the fabric underneath at the same time and causing creases in the fabric that don't want to be there. Now, you don't have to invest in a sleeve roll. You can get a small, find yourself an old hand towel, roll it up tight and use that instead of your sleeve roll. We'll be using two sorts of thread, one that matches your fabric and one that's a high contrast to your fabric. So one that's going to really stand out and you're not going to miss. We're going to use this for our tailor's tacks, and we're going to use it when we're doing our gathering stitches as well. We'll be using some forming tape. You don't have to use this, but I like to use it round necklines to reinforce them and stop them stretching out. And last but not least, we're going to need some fabric. Now, I'm using this viscose fabric. I got it last year, I think, from Fabworks. So there's 3 meters of this. It recommends light to medium weight fabrics. So anything from a cotton lawn, a viscose, it'd be beautiful for an evening wear in a viscose satin. Oh, but not the easiest to sew with for a beginner. Or you can get a lightweight viscose linen, would look really nice as well, but I wouldn't go any heavier than that kind of fabric because it's got big floaty sleeves on it and they might start feeling a bit bulky under the arm area otherwise. Last but not least is the dreaded invisible zip. Now, the pattern tells you that you need a 12-inch zip. I'm going to tell you to get at least a 16-inch zip. This one's whopping, it's 22 inches. It needs to be bigger than what you need for the technique that I'm going to use when we're putting the zip in. So 16-inch zip at least. And if you're sewing in floaty fabrics, my recommendation is to get yourself some best press, and we're going to use this when we're to stiffen and put structure into the seams before we sew them. So there we go, that was a huge long list. It will all be detailed in the description below, and it will also be listed in the Facebook group which I've set up purely for these sew-alongs, so that we can all share together as we go on our sewing journey. So let's talk about measuring. On that list of tools and equipment, I was meant to put a measuring tape, and yes, you will need one, won't you, if you're sewing. Now, I'm going to be popping my body measurements up here so that you can see how I worked out my sizing. For this pattern, you need to measure your largest part of your bust area. Now, I would recommend doing this in your underwear, wearing the bra that you're going to wear when you wear this dress, for the simple reason you will get a better fit. So you're going to measure the largest part of your bust, you're going to measure your waist, and to find your natural waist, do a teacup, and where the crease is, that is where your waist is, and that's where you need to measure. And then you need to measure your hips, which is the biggest part of your derriere. So they may be in a different place to mine. Just do a few measurements and round the bum and the hip area and choose the largest one. If you've got a friend to help you do this, it would be really useful. So if you go to a social, get someone to do your measurements while you're there. I always recommend taking your measurements before you start each garment that you make, because they may fluctuate and change, and you want a good fit when you've finished sewing. So we've done our measurements, we've gone through all our tools and equipment. The next thing we need to do is cut the pattern out. So the Seasons of East dress skims over the bust, skims over the waist, it skims over every area, to be honest. It doesn't sit tight. So it's got some ease in it, some positive ease. So when I've looked at my body measurements, the garment size that fits best to my body measurements is the size 12, and I'll pop my body measurements and the garment measurements, finished garment measurements there, so that you can see the difference and how I've decided on a 12. If you're struggling with your size and you're watching this video, put a comment below and I'll help you. Send me your body measurements and I'll tell you what size I think you should be cutting out. Yes, I've made a toile in some pink poly cotton that I have in my stash that I use just for that purpose. Now, nobody likes to make a toile, but please do it. It can make a world of difference to your fit and your finish. I've just done the bodice, so I've cut out the body's fronts and the body's back. I've not finished any of the seams. I've literally sewn the fronts together at the front, and I've sewn the backs together under the arms and at the shoulders at one side, and then only up to the underarm seam, because obviously there's meant to be a zip in that side. Now, the alterations that I've made are, I've taken a wedge out about an inch all the way across the middle of the arm on both sides, the front and the back, just because I felt like the armholes were right down near my waist and they were too low. The scoop is also still a little bit revealing for me, so it's showing the little boobies there, and I don't want to, so I'm going to make a mental note, mark on my pattern to raise that up by an inch. So they're the alterations I've made to my toile. If when you put this on it feels too tight around the middle, then go up a size before you cut your fabric out. If it's huge, obviously go down a size. The other thing to look at is where your waistline is compared to where it should be. It's meant to be high-waisted but not empire line. So by taking that wedge out of the whole of the middle of the bodice, it's raised this up enough for me to be happy where it's now sitting. If yours is still too short because you're tall, you lucky thing, then you can lengthen the bodice at the bottom. Don't mess with this middle bit because that will be fine. Just add the length onto the bottom of the front and the back bodice. And hopefully you'll get a really good fit on your dress. So now we're happy with the size, and I need to transfer my alterations to my pattern pieces, and then we'll get them all cut out together. So here we are at my cutting table. This is the fabric I'm going to use, very summery indeed, perfect for my holes. Now, before you start cutting out, you need to make sure that the grain of your fabric is straight, and the grain is what runs from the top to the bottom. The other thing you need to check is if your fabric has got a right or a wrong side with the design, and make sure you're pinning your pattern pieces on the right way. You don't want flowers upside down when you put your dress on. There are two ways that you can find the straight of the grain on your fabric. If it's patterned like mine, you can make sure that where the fold is, that the pattern, the piece of the pattern I'm using, this leaf, all the way along matches. If it's plain fabric or you can't find a landmark on your pattern, the other thing you can do is this end is the selvage end. You can match your selvages nice and neatly, and that will give you a near enough straight selvage when you're cutting out. The other thing that I've done at this end, my fabric is not falling off the table. I've rolled it all up at one end so that there's no drag on the fabric and it doesn't distort things when I'm cutting it out. Now that we've done all that, we need to start talking about finding the straight of the grain on your pattern piece. So here's our pattern piece for the front, and on every pattern piece there's an arrow line and it says grain line, and that's what we're going to use to make sure our pattern piece is straight with the grain. So place it on the fabric, grab a pin, and where the arrow is right at the top, stick a pin through that arrow going down the grain. Now grab your tape measure. Use the centimetres because they're more accurate than inches, and measure from the arrow to your selvage. Now that says 29.5 centimetres. Go to the bottom arrow of the arrow down here and do the same thing. That one says 29. So it needs moving out by 0.5 centimetre, so I can move it that way a little bit, not a lot. 29.5. So that was only out by 0.5 centimetre, but you know, it's 0.5 centimetre that's skew width. So now I've anchored those two arrows in place, that's all good to go. I can pin the rest of this piece. We're going to cut these out one piece at a time. So pin round and get this cut out. Move your fabric up the table, check again that you're happy with the straight of the grain where the fold line is or where your selvage is, and grab your next pattern piece. Now the back has got a fold line, it's got an arrow that says fold, and that has to be on the fold of your fabric. Now obviously I'm going to have to turn my pattern piece upside down, that's absolutely fine. You don't need to check the straight of your grain with this one because you're following the fold line, which is straight. Pin that one down and cut it out again. Now the front and back skirt are both done on the fold, so I've opened my fabric out and folded it into the middle. So there is the fold at that side, and that's the edge of the fabric at that side. So either end of my fabric has now got a fold in, so I can put one on one end and the other on the other. Make sure you put the fold line marking on the fold for both of them. That one will have to be turned over the wrong way, but it works. They just need pinning down and cutting out, and I've got my 2 pattern pieces out of one width of fabric. So there we go, that's the pattern pieces all cut out, all ready to sew, and I hope you found this little video informative and it's helping you grow in confidence with your sewing journey. That's it for this week. Next week we're going to be doing the sewing together. Exciting! So take care and I will see you next time. Love you loads and happy sewing.